Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. My name is Katie and today I'm going to be filming my absolute favorite type of video to film. You can probably guess what it is because I've got my Dracula t-shirt on. I think most of you guys know this by now, but my favorite videos to film are definitely finding underrated horror or psychological thriller novels, and today I have an absolutely phenomenal one for you guys. So today I'm going to be filming a spoiler-free review of Cold Moon Over Babylon by Michael McDowell. And if Michael McDowell, if that name sounds familiar, he actually wrote one of my favorite books called The Elementals. I said this I think in the beginning of that review as well, but I'll mention it again. He unfortunately did not necessarily rise to popularity because he unfortunately died when he was in, I want to say it was in his 40s, so most of his books were published within either, I think it was the late 70s or early 80s. So this is only the second book I've read by him, but it definitely seems that his kind of key area is kind of gothic atmospheric horror that tends to take place in creepy, desolate, I cannot say that word, that desolate towns in the deep south. So now I'll go ahead and get into a spoiler-free review and then we'll get into the pros and cons. So Cold Moon Over Babylon, it takes place in a town in Alabama called, not surprisingly, Babylon. And it's a bit of a difficult story to describe because there isn't one central narrator. It's told from quite a few different points of view, but I would say the key kind of family in this story are the Larkins. They run a blueberry farm that unfortunately is not doing it very well money-wise, and you have Evelyn, who's the kind of elderly grandmother, and her two grandchildren, Jerry, who's in his 20s, and Margaret, who's 14. Now there are a ton of other characters. You have the Redfields, who are the very wealthy family in the town. You also have the sheriff and his 16-year-old daughter, and the story really kicks off when quite early on in the book one of these characters is brutally murdered in quite a horrific way. So I won't give anything else away, I'll just read this quote from the back of the book, which I think really sets the tone for the story. But it says, "And beneath the murky surface of the river, a shifting, almost human shape slowly takes form. Night after night it will pursue the murderer, and when the full moon rises over Babylon, it will seek a terrible vengeance." So my main pro for this book would definitely be the same reason I adored The Elementals. His writing is just so atmospheric. The way he writes these remote, creepy, small towns, and his writing just overall is so beautiful. And I think particularly with horror novels, I feel like you're generally just rating how scary it was, how many twists there were, but what cements him as a wonderful author is just his writing, because I think his writing style is just absolutely lovely. And the way he even just describes the weather in the town, and even when he writes kind of horrific scenes where people are dying, and in a way it's kind of almost beautiful as well. Now I think some people might read this book and say, oh, some of the characters weren't fleshed out as much as they should have, but I don't know, I think the length of the book was perfect for what it was. And when, say, a person or persons would die in the book, I would genuinely become very upset, and I thought death overall was handled in a very visceral and deep way, because I feel like sometimes you'll read a horror novel and someone will die and then 10 pages later nobody gives a shit, but this book definitely handles death, I think, very realistically. But of course this is a horror novel, so we have to get and talk about the scare factor, and I did think the scare factor for this book was quite high. Now I think regardless of which type of horror, whether you like it to be more atmospheric or whether you like it to, say, be just downright bloody with jump scares, you definitely get both of those in this book, so just kind of a warning going into it. But even like the opening scene of the book, I was like, fuck. Well, I will also say I listened to this as an audiobook, but he did a fantastic job. He had a slight southern accent, which I also think really kind of lended itself to kind of putting you in the mood for the story. Now in terms of cons, I will say this book did lack some diversity, and I know the only person of color in the book, I don't know if she was technically a nurse or a housekeeper, but she's the person who is kind of taking care of a man in the book who's bedridden. Now this next aspect is not a con, but I'm only including it in this section because I think a lot of people might view this as a con. So do not worry with what I'm about to say, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I will say you find out who the murderer is like pretty early on in this book. So if you're the type of person who like needs tons of twists in your horror novels, this might not be for you. And that's actually a type of discussion video I'm thinking about making, because I feel like psychological thrillers and horror novels are kind of lately have been judged solely based on whether or not they have twists and the twists are good, and I feel like outside of that people don't necessarily care about the other characteristics of the books. Not saying you guys, but I've just kind of noticed that. But so again, please go ahead and check out Cold Moon Over Babylon. His books unfortunately are kind of difficult to come by. I haven't been able to find them in my library or any bookstores, but I definitely would recommend going ahead and checking out the audiobook. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and please let me know any underrated horror novels you think I might like, and I'll see you guys soon.